Hi, hi everyone. This is Joy Divergence. Today I'd like to talk to you about ownership and what is the purpose of ownership. In this particular case, when we tend to make our own messes and taking accountability and responsibility. Ownership is very much so something that has allowed me to step up out of the shadows and take accountability and responsibility for parts of my life that before I couldn't do very well. And even now, I still have moments of learning, and we all have our own stubbornness where ego gets. But ownership can be can be very powerful. Ownership is something that not everybody likes to really have in this way. And it's mostly because their ego gets in the way. But it's very vital and very important if you want people to respect you, if you want to have a better outcome in life than what you're already having. You've got to be able to own where your mess is and recognize that even the smallest of messes, like the one you see behind me here, can be something that can stop you from doing the things you want in life. Now, most people may not understand why that could actually even stop you from doing anything in life. I mean, this isn't a very big mess it's for some people to look at. But for others, it may be a very big mess. I have a lifestyle, though, where the kind of mess that I dealt with was far beyond this. And it got a lot in my way. It stopped me from allowing myself to really be okay with people coming into my home, for one. But when I first started trying to clean, I wasn't cleaning it for the right reasons. I wasn't taking accountability and responsibility for me. I was doing it out of fear for somebody else's judgment and what they thought of me. Then I got to a point to where, I was like, I got to one day where when someone came into my house and I was like, I didn't care that day that they saw how messy my place was. I had other people who told me along the way to sit there and say things like, it shows that somebody lives here. And then I had other people who came along and said some other things that were kind of like, I trust that you know what you're doing. I trust that you know where you're supposed to be at any given moment. Where you know you are meant to be. And that was a big deal on both of those times. I didn't quite understand that that there was even a possibility that it was okay to have a mess. It was okay to be a mess. That wasn't really allowed growing up. Heck, I couldn't even wear the clothes that I wanted. And if my mom ever were to watch this, well, she might be kind of frustrated with me because I had ego getting in the way. And I was very frustrated with my mom. She was a stepmom, so I was a teenager. And before I was even a teenager, I met her when I was about 9. This was just one of my stepmoms. And so when I met her, she had this tendency to kind of tell me what to wear. And I'm sure it's something that her mom taught her too. But I didn't want to be told what to wear. I wanted to be myself. So anytime that she would start telling me that I needed to go put on something nicer, at times I would go and I'd put on polka dot pants and a striped t-shirt or a plaid something with it. And she'd look at me and she'd go, you need to go put on something else. And she'd say it very frustratingly. I was like, okay. So I go up and I put on jeans and a t-shirt. And I came back down. She goes, all right, that's better than before. At least you weren't wearing what you were wearing before, kind of thing. Like, she was still frustrated that I wasn't wearing what she wanted me to wear. Now, keep in mind, I thought that was kind of funny as a kid, but it was because she had such major control issues that I had to find some pleasure somewhere. If I wasn't doing things the way she wanted to put me down, make me feel bad. Knew that she had control or power over me at times and stuff in different ways. But over time, I began to find myself. I took ownership and wasn't the victim of her anymore. Many times I was a victim growing up, and I had a very messy life. But ownership made it so that I could move forward, that I could be accountable for my thoughts, my feelings, emotions, actions, and reactions. I'm not perfect by a long shot, but over time, I began to find different answers. In different ways, I took ownership. One of the ways when I was starting to learn how to do this, I had a really extremely hard time doing just the simplest of things sometimes. Something like doing dishes. And dishes, for some people, it's a very simple task. Some people just say, oh, it just needs to be done, so I'm going to do it. But if you understood the complexity of the severe traumas that were behind what I had dealt with, I thought maybe people might just understand if I told them. If I told them the backstory of all the challenges that I had and how the challenges even came to be. And don't worry, when I tell that story, it will be told. But this time it will be told in a personal power stance, so to speak. Where I'm not a victim of what once I was told that I was. In fact, I had been treated like as if I was a victim so severely that you had to separate the victim from the predator. But what I realized when time went on was that they were being a victim themselves when they did that. Now, if they ever heard this message, or at least one of them, because the other had passed on, one of the adults that were in my life that was a parent of mine decided to split my older brother and I from each other. It was actually both my parents at the time. But when they split us, they were doing it from a victim stance. Like, well, I have to protect her. Hence, this is where the drama or prison triangle that I mentioned before comes into place. And the reason I'm talking about this today is because some people forget, including myself, from time to time, how to take ownership again after so much has happened. I didn't know how to take ownership very much before. Even as a child, there was moments that I did, but I didn't know it as ownership. I just knew it as, I just do what I do. I kept moving forward. But I had done this time and time again, but there had been so much junk, so much complex trauma and forced beliefs upon me in so many different ways that I couldn't take ownership at the level that I really wanted to. But that changed one day for me. One day I called up one of these individuals and I asked them, would you be open and willing to? Of course, at the time, they said no. It was very tragic. I felt like another piece of me had been torn, ripped out for the last time. That was the day that I was done. Done trying to go back. I was done trying to ask for the other person to hear me out. It's very hard sometimes to take ownership back, to take your personal power back. Take accountability and responsibility for you, especially when you had what felt like the world against you. But then I found people along the way that were very impressed, actually. And it surprised me. Till I met a couple one time that the husband had been doing a speech up on stage, and the wife pulled me aside for a moment. And she goes, "You surprise me and Chris every single time." And I couldn't hear the rest of what she was saying because her husband was speaking so loud at the time up on stage that, well, the speakers were right next to us. And so you can imagine it was very challenging to hear past that, especially when he gets going on what he does. I was just surprised to hear that from somebody, from a friend. From a friend one day. And I asked them, even when I was previously married, if they would be my friends. And I was surprised by the response that I got, even over an email. And they said yes. I didn't quite understand, of course, why it was that simple that day. But it touched my heart very deeply. But they saw me time and time again taking ownership, taking accountability and responsibility for my thoughts, my feelings, my actions and reactions. And of course, some days I would still have stubborn moments. And another mentor was at one of these events with me, and we were doing what was known as a board break, something you normally would do in like in a karate class or something like that. But he looked at me and he goes, "No, I want you to say this with feeling." Because some days I would, but some days it's like, I got this. And I'm like, chose all in automatically. But he really wanted me to have a much deeper breakthrough, to take accountability and responsibility on a much deeper level. He wanted to be a part of the transformation that he would see in me. And over time, I did more. In fact, one time I went as far as to go on to that Facebook group that I was once in. And they're still friends of mine there. I just needed to take a step back for me for a little bit. And at the time, however, I was still very much engaged with this group. And I went in and I had a breakthrough online so that people could see that it could be done. but I was having a really hard time doing a breakthrough, and I couldn't find anybody to do this with. And I knew that I had some major things showing up for me, but I also knew that I needed some support in some form or way. So I decided to be that support for myself that day, and on a really in-depth level. I started to explain what my limiting belief was at the time and stuff, and saying that I don't believe that anybody really thinks that I matter. And then I turned it around and I said, the cost of something like this, or at least something to this effect, at least of what I had said, the cost of something like this had it cost me my life. I hadn't tried to commit suicide or anything, but it had cost me my life. It cost me the option and the opportunities to really choose in. The thing is that that day I decided to start just saying afterwards, I matter. I matter. Until I was at the top of my lungs and I was screaming and yelling and saying, I matter. Except for it was even more so than that. But what I realized after I was done, and I saw what somebody posted to my post, I realized two things. One, that I finally believed it. And I saw that others did too. In fact, I had people saying on there, that is a leader. Although when I went to go back and watch the video later, the second thing I realized was how scary I could actually be. I scared myself even that day. I jumped out of my seat. I was like, what the hell? Who the hell is that? And it was mostly just because I didn't think for them that I did. At least I didn't fully believe it at the level that I did that day. Not in that way. Not in front of that many people. I took ownership that day. I took accountability for myself that day and responsibility for myself. I started watching YouTube videos that were empowering speeches. And one of the ones I came across that when I was building a website, so to speak, for myself, to help me give me like a vision board kind of thing of what I really was envisioning. Get as much out of my brain as much as possible onto this website. And it's kind of a mess, to be honest, in some ways. And in other ways, people get enough information that they see what I'm about, at least on there. But the major thing about it was that there was a particular excuse there was a particular YouTube video that I found that I posted up on there, and For those of you that are Pirates of the Caribbean fans, you probably know Elizabeth Swann's quote very well. But I would sit there and I would watch it repeatedly and play the movie, the video of it over and over some mornings and keep on repeating what she was saying. And somehow it just, every single time, it gave me the strength to move forward more than I ever could have before. My ex didn't understand how I was doing it. The man who I used to be married to. He's still a good person. And he still has a lot to learn and grow from himself and take accountability and responsibility for himself. But he hasn't done it yet. And that's okay. He'll do so in his own timing. He'll learn and grow in the way that he needs to. He tends to allow ego to get in the way a lot more, on a more in-depth level than I even do, which is hard to say because I can let ego get in the way pretty good. And over time, I would realize that even though he had a lot to learn, I still had a lot to learn too. Some things he didn't have to go through that I did, I don't think, but some things he did as well. Knowing what I know now, I feel sorry, I feel sad, in some ways still for him even to this day. Because he does not know what he does not know. And time and again, I end up watching him fall victim to even to the woman that he's married to now. He wanted me to stay with him, but he knew somehow intuitively long before I even knew that we weren't going to last. But he knew what he knew. But he wasn't taking accountability because he didn't know how to. Not at this level. See, every time he spoke about what he knew, it went against everything that he desired. The only way that that would have changed is if he actually had taken ownership at the magnitude that I was doing at the same time in our own different ways. And I thought that my love could have been enough to be able to help us both through, and I think at times he felt the same way. But I had enough one day. One day I realized the truth behind what was actually happening. And I realized he wasn't going to change. Not anytime soon, at least. It doesn't mean that he wouldn't ever change. It doesn't mean he wouldn't become aware one day and finally own up to what he had done, whether that was just to himself and maybe a group of friends or whatever he needs to do for him. But taking accountability and responsibility can be very hard at times, or it can be very easy. But if we build the muscle, our heart muscle, give ourselves the self-love that we need, back to where it is stronger than it was before, we have a more of a fighting chance in this world. One day when I went to an event, to another person's event, I was with my daughter. And I went to go and, excuse me, a lot of information to process here, apparently. I went to go to this event, and when I did, We were running a little bit late, but I still made it to the event, at least the end of it. And then got home and everything and stuff. But while I was there at the event, after it was over, I was playing with my daughter, and another friend of mine was there playing with her too. But while I was running back and forth, I had a sudden pain in my chest. I had an instinct in a moment right before then that I needed to stop and slow down. I didn't know why. I ended up learning that basically that day I was dealing with broken heart syndrome. I had taken on too much. And that if I didn't stop taking on so much, because I cared so much, that it was only going to get worse. And I'd met one person who had overcome it. And then I had a friend that I'd met previous to this experience, that later down the road, not too long afterwards, she told me that she was dealing with the same thing. But that day I stopped and I asked myself, what can I do about this? The answer that I got back was that I needed to stop caring so much. That I needed to stop caring so much. And that what I needed to do next was that I needed to start forgiving those who had harmed me. I had had people harm me throughout my life, most of my life, in different ways, whether it was mental, emotional, physical, sexual. But nonetheless, I found a way. Nonetheless, I asked myself that very day, what do I need to do to overcome this? Because I do not want to end up like what the other woman who had it down to 40%, then to learn that my friend had it all the way down to 30%, 35 or something like that. It was on a lower scale than the other person that I'd known. I was glad to have found the one person who actually shared with me how she'd actually overcome that. She didn't share the whole story, she just shared that she had overcome it. And then I had to. I don't know what the percentage was. For some reason, I didn't know how to look at it. I just knew that I needed to overcome it. I wanted to help people so much that I was putting my own health at risk. Even though I'd already overcome fibromyalgia, even though I'd already overcome some other major challenges in life, this one would have stopped me dead in my tracks, as it would many. There are actually people who die from broken heart syndrome. And they don't get to usually come back. Because it shows how deeply their heart was broken. So when you decide to take accountability and responsibility for you, and you decide to do more of what is right for you, in a way that gives you love that nobody else more than likely has if you are having these problems. But if you wish to know further how I overcame it, please, I invite you to contact me. And perhaps, if you are open and you are willing to create the availability for you to overcome your walls and obstacles in the matrix. In this particular case, it is the prisoner's matrix. If you want to overcome this, and you feel a strong desire, please reach out. Because even if I am not the right person, there will be somebody. All it takes is you deciding that you want to get out whatever challenge it is that you're dealing with. You too can make it up and over the wall through the obstacles and create a better life for you too. Know that you are loved. Big Bear hugs. Namaste.